So now we have the final talk of the day, who is from Eric Wernert, who is an adjunct assistant professor in computer science at Indiana University. And this must be an established user because he got his degree from IU in 2000. And when we have data, we not only need to store it and access it, we have to look at it because that's how you get information. So Eric will tell us how to look at data. Thank you.
Yeah, what I'm going to talk about today is really, I just selected one of the many visualization packages that is out there and try to give you some idea of why it would be a good tool for people to use in conjunction with high performance and grid-based applications. It is one of the handful of visualization tools that actually scales very well. It works over, it has an integrated client-server mode, a parallel backend. Paraview is just one of those. Other things like Visit, and there's a few specialty tools that actually do that. But this is, so I wanted to pick one that would grow with you as your data needs advance. A little, or the outline, I do want to spend a little bit of time giving you a background on visualization, because if you understand visualization in general, you'll be able to move very smoothly or with minimal effort between the various packages that you might be needing to use. And in some cases, as we'll talk about, if you're working in a particular domain, there's particular packages that the scientists are used to working with. But if you understand the visualization at a more abstract level, that will help you actually make those transitions and scale your data. So I do want to spend a little time with that. Then talk about Paraview, again, looking a little bit at its architecture so you understand what goes on when you need to scale it up into a distributed mode. Look at a couple of different examples that we've done here at IU with different data types. Talk very briefly about the advanced features. So the title's a bit of a misnomer because we won't spend a lot of time demonstrating those advanced features because if you don't do the basic things and get these tools working on your desktop and understand how those are working, then the advanced features don't matter much. They also get very specific to particular installations and such, so that and there's lots of documentation out there for Paraview on how to do that. And you want to leave a lot of time at the end for question and answer. And so if you are following along out there, these are some good pages to look at. The Paraview homepage is paraview.org. And if you drill down to the wiki, they have lots of information there, tutorials, other examples, things from some particular good ones are the tutorials that are given at the IEEE Visualization Conference each year, along with some data sets there, so be sure to look at those. And if I did want to throw out one URL that's a nice one for visualization in general, and that's visworld.com. That's only been live for about a year now, but it takes visualization very broadly defined, and it actually incorporates things like computer graphics, rendering, computer graphics hardware, all sorts of applications in science and information visualization and so forth. So and then it has some ways to filter out just the information that you're interested in. So be sure to check that out. So basically, what is visualization? As you all know, it's a visual representation of data. It's a picture's worth 1,000 words, so a good visualization is worth 1,000, or let's say 100,000 numbers. So, and there's definitions for anything broadly beyond that, any technique for creating images, diagrams, or animations to reveal information or to communicate a message. In the field, we actually talk about, we make some distinctions between, the main one is between scientific visualization, sometimes called sci-viz, and information visualization, or sometimes called infoviz. In scientific visualization, the data comes from some type of natural phenomenon, be it a molecule, the arrangement of stars in the sky, the arrangement of bones in the human body, and those things have a natural three-dimensional representation. So the techniques for scientific visualization look at how to leverage that natural three-dimensionality of the data and to help you reveal some information about it. In information visualization, you might be dealing with networks, some social data where you have networks of connections. Might result from text mining, might result from multi-dimensional data, financial data. And these are the sorts of things that have gone on for many years in mathematical and statistical computing there, all those types of plots and things that you might do. If you're probably familiar with the work of Edward Tufte, has some really excellent books presenting some information visualization methods. But the data has no natural spatial representation, and so it's up to the researcher, the user, to pick the one that makes the most sense for them. Some people say that scientific visualization is more or less a solved problem because we have the algorithms and such. Still working on some issues of scalability more broadly, but and a lot of work goes on in information visualization. That's where people are being more creative in terms of algorithms and representations. So of course we're going to focus on general purpose scientific visualization, and that's one of the strengths of Paraview. So for example, things like molecular visualization, medical visualization, geospatial, astronomy, flow visualization. Some of these things can be done in Paraview. Sometimes they're left to other specialized packages, such as, say, GIS or molecular visualization. And just examples of information visualization sorts of things include things like abstract representations of timeline, tree maps. Sorry, that's so dark here for the IU folks, but that's showing directory structure and the nesting of files within folders, within other folders, and so forth. Network diagrams, they're showing connectivity between people, and innovative sorts of things like radial maps. So where might you use visualization in your scientific workflow? There's lots of possibilities. Here's a few of the more commonly referred to ones. Exploration. In early phases, you're just getting your data. You don't really know what is interesting. You're trying to develop your hypothesis, and so you're looking for trends, you're looking for outliers, interesting things to look at and to kind of guide your scientific process. Visualization can be really nice when you're trying to debug, especially some large codes and you're getting some erratic behavior. Actually visualizing the output, it might give you some type of intuition into what's going wrong. Quite frequently there's errors in boundary conditions when you're running in parallel codes. Confirmation, does the data show me what I expect? Am I on track? And sometimes just bringing up visualization every once in a while to make sure that your runs look good. Of course, for many of these things, you can also do some type of statistical analysis, some numerical, quantitative sorts of things to verify that as well. Visually guided measurement and analysis can be sort of in the middle, towards the end of the pipeline. How can you visually extract the information that you want to see out of massive data sets? What are the really interesting parts that you might want to calculate in more detail or to do more detailed analysis on? And of course, presentation for colleagues, for funding agencies, for general public, trying to communicate the impact of your work. Of course, visualization comes in there. We talk about visualization having a pipeline, which basically is something like you read your data into your visualization package, you filter it, you select some subset of what you want to see, you map that to some type of geometric representation, you actually render that geometric representation into pixels, and then you might interact with it. Okay, so be aware when we're talking about Paraview, they sort of overload the term filter, so you might think of it more in that data filtering term. And the filters in Paraview can perform some traditional filtering functions, but they also have a mapping function in there where they actually, each filter within Paraview also encapsulates a mapping and some information that helps out the renderer. Okay. So you might also visualize it as this pipeline here with the dotted arrows being the interaction, and you can interact back to any point earlier in the pipeline. In fact, that data flow paradigm was at the heart of many of the early visualization applications. Some of you may have used AVS. OpenDX is an open source version of Data Explorer. I don't know how active that is anymore. Iris Explorer. Newer things like VizTrails all incorporate some type of visual display. In fact, they let the user actually connect modules they construct their pipeline visually. So again, apologies to IU folks, but what you see there is if you were to read a file, then that actually might go over to a filter and then go over to a mapper, and so you just drag boxes between like data types, and the data will actually get flow or copied through that network. And so this is a very intuitive way, a fairly intuitive way for end users to develop their own custom applications, because they best know their science, but they don't know how, they may not know how to program or do all the things necessary for a graphical program especially. So a little more about types of data. Just briefly, you were concerned about the dimensionality of your data, and since, again, we're talking about scientific visualization, it could be 1D, it could be 2D, quite frequently 3D, and you might have a single time step or a series. The structure of that data is very important. Is it a uniform rectilinear grid, such as this, which actually would be, in a 2D case, is your image data. In a 3D case would be your volumetric data, comes out of CT scans and so forth. The coordinates are implied there. It could be a non-uniform grid, could be a curvilinear grid. Oh, got a laser pointer there?
You can use your mouse.
Ah, use my mouse. All righty. And we also have our, so here the unstructured grid goes away from these rectangular cells to any sort of triangular or tetrahedral data. And polygonal data, and of course you have just unstructured points in 3 space. And continuing on in that discussion of data, is your data connected? Is there some type of, you got points in 3D space, is there an explicit connection between them, or is there an implicit connection as there would be in image data? And what type of data do you have there? Is the data supposed to be located within the cells that you define with your coordinates, or is it located at the vertices? It's a very important distinction. And you know your code best, and so you know which one you're doing, if it's supposed to be representing that entire 3-dimensional space, or if it's a sample at a particular location. And then, of course, what kind of data do you have there? Scalar values, vector values. You can have as many values stored for that given grid, and then most tools will let you select which of those various fields, be they scalar or vector, that you want to look at. And then how do you render the stuff? You render it out as points, lines, surfaces, color mapped surfaces, volumetric data, which is semi-translucent. So this is becoming much more practical with the advent of graphics cards. So there's, many of one of the examples we're going to show you goes back 6 years for us. And at the time, only the most expensive SGI systems would allow us to do the volume rendering. Now most of you can do this very well on your laptop, thanks to the advance of the graphics cards. And in the lower right there is the non-photorealistic rendering. I don't see many visualization packages that support this, but the process of illustrators rendering out very complex diagrams, especially in the area of medicine and anatomy, goes back many, many centuries. And so borrowing from some of those techniques, we can actually render out things that don't look realistic, but they convey the information. And again, that's the goal there. So I would expect that we might see a lot more with non-photorealistic rendering in visualization packages soon. And how interactive do you need to be? Do you need to have it real time, where we're talking 15 to 30 frames a second, or can you tolerate something less if you want to get more data? And if it's really big, you need to go into some type of batch mode. Finally, a couple of other things. What type of display are you viewing on? Your laptop, your desktop? That's great. In fact, again, the graphics cards make that very possible. If you've got 3-dimensional data, especially if it's points and lines and things, it's hard to pull the structure out. Stereoscopic displays are very nice. There's a new wave of 3D TVs that are making that a nice feature for a lab to have. So several people can gather around, view the data in 3D, and the glasses are a lot cheaper than they used to be. Not terribly more stylish, a little bit more stylish, but you still kind of look geeky. Ultra high resolution displays are everywhere. I see several of them at our endpoints around here, and this is a great way for people to collaborate and view data at many times the resolution that they could get on their desktop. And then finally, immersive displays, which we've had for about the last 15 years, things like caves, domes, etc., which take advantage of stereoscopic plus tracking to give a correct vision or representation of the data regardless of how you move. So it also generates a very natural sort of interaction. We've got some researchers at IU who are looking at how we can adapt these general purpose tools to work in conjunction with these immersive visualization displays so that you don't have to leave a package. Let's say if you're using Paraview on your desktop, well, that's what you want to use in one of these advanced displays as well. You don't want to have to translate out of there. And then we're going to show you these different types of interaction, but keep in mind that, again, the focus here is interactive visualization. So you're always changing parts of that pipeline by picking things, by slicing, cutting, moving, manipulating, changing representations. So those are the sorts of things that happen in that interaction phase. So let's talk a little bit about Paraview. Paraview is built on top of the visualization toolkit, which has been around for since 1993, coming out of GE Corporate Research and Development. They spun off in a company called Kitware in 1998, and have gone on to actually make a number of other really interesting APIs, including the Insight Toolkit, which is funded by the NIH for doing image data, and more recently, in conjunction with Sandia National Labs, Titan, so they're doing InfoVis. So one of the big problems that the InfoVis field is facing is there's lots of great tools out there, but a lot of them are written in Java, have very interesting representations and interactions, but they don't scale. Most of them will top out at a few tens of thousands of points, okay? And researchers want to go into hundreds of thousands, millions, terabytes, and so forth. So this is really exciting that we're now seeing some of this merger or transfer of this architecture that's worked so well for scientific visualization over to information visualization. And VTK, again, being an API, is actually at the heart of a number of other scientific visualization packages, competitors to Paraview, if you would. So if you use something, I've used Visit, another really good one, 3D Slicer, Mayavai, VizTrails. These are all building on top of VTK. So if you understand that VTK pipeline and architecture, again, it makes you sort of able to move easily between those various tools. Paraview's been around itself since 1999. It's more of an end-user application. It adds a GUI plus a parallel backend by itself. VTK does not have a parallel backend, and if you did, you'd have to. There's things you can do, obviously, with in conjunction with MPI and various codes. You could make it parallel, but it's kind of tricky to do. And if that's not your area of research, you would much rather have someone else do it and then just leverage that tool. So that's the idea behind Paraview. And the Paraview pipeline looks something like this. A modification of that general visualization pipeline, but using some specific terminology that can have sources, that goes through filters that modify the data in some way, mappers, convert data into objects. VTK introduces the concept of actors that kind of sit between the abstract visualization space of mappers and the particular implementation. VTK in this case is written with OpenGL, so it actually creates actors that can work with the graphics cards, and then you actually render that on some window, and then that window is part of a display device with an interaction device, and you can move through it. So that architecture provides a couple of interesting places where you could split up the pipeline between a server on the back end, your HPC resources, and your display on the front end, be it your desktop computer or cave or tiled wall. If you do it here, get my mouse to behave. You do it here, you're actually going to be transferring the data. The data from your application might be filtered down, but that could be practical. In most cases, probably not terribly practical because you've got a lot of data. You could transfer your geometry commands or your graphics commands to your renderer. That happens in some cases. In fact, that's that's the default mode for the client-server mode in Paraview. That it'll start up, the back end will send the graphics commands or the geometry to your local renderer, figuring that most people have some type of hardware acceleration. Or in some cases, you might actually want to have the rendering be done on the back end and actually just transfer images or pixels to be reassembled on your screen. So you've got a couple of different interesting client-server architectures, and here's from the Paraview tutorial. that Kitware puts out. They show the different modes. It has a client, which is actually the GUI plus the display windows, the data server, and the render server. And when you start it up as an application on your desktop, and by the way, I forgot to mention, but Paraview is free for you to download. It's open source. You can compile it yourself, or they have pre-compiled binaries for Windows, Mac, and Linux. To get a lot of the advanced functionality on the back end, because there's so many different flavors of MPI and such, they often recommend on your server side that you do recompile it yourself. But it's freely available, and so I encourage you to try it out. So when you run it on your desktop machine, it's actually bringing up an instance of the client, the server, and the data server and the render server all together. In the common client server mode, it actually creates one or more pairs of data servers and render servers, and then those communicate across the network to your desktop client. You can actually break out the data servers from the render servers, but like we talked before, that usually means you're moving your original data set, which in many cases could be prohibitive. And again, this architecture is the key to Paraview's scalability. A lot of apps have been developed that are really nice visualization apps, but it's much more difficult to go back and to retrofit scalability into an architecture. So Paraview has done this from the start, and that's why I recommend it. So it's sort of like learning to drive on if you haven't done any visualization before, you might be learning to drive on a Ferrari or Abrams tank or something if you want to use speed or power. And you might not need all that speed or power, but at some point, perhaps you will, and you'll be glad you have it. And just one of the other options there is that you have a variety of options for displaying. So you can go from your client to a server cluster and out to a tile display. So let's look at some of the GUI components that you have in Paraview. This is a slightly older screenshot that I have here, but you can actually bring up one or more render windows. It's not until the third version that you actually have more than one window open at a time, so that's actually really nice. But then basically what you have over here in the upper left-hand corner is a representation of the pipeline. And you'll see there's a little eyeball next to each one, so you can actually turn representations off and on in the rendering window. But that you'll actually see as you connect various filters together that actually create a little tree structure there. So again, you get a nice visual representation of that pipeline that you're putting together. For each object in there, there's several tabs. One has parameters specific to that object. Every one of them has the ability to display some type of representation. In some cases, it's simply just the bounding boxes. It doesn't know how to render that, but it knows something about the data and what its extents are in 3D space. And then information tells you something about what Paraview thinks it got when it read that file or performed that filtering operation. So we'll show you those things there. And there's lots of different file formats. Some are specific to VTK and Paraview. And then there's actually import filters for lots of other commonly used sorts of things, including like protein data banks. So you can use this for molecular visualization. Probably not the greatest, but if sometimes you want to bring that model in as a reference towards some data set that you've computed. A lot of people use HDF. Insight is a commercial package. It's quite popular. Digital elevation maps. You can bring in various geometry files, Vermal, and so forth. And by the way, you can also create your own sources. So if you're just learning, they have something called a source menu there, which lets you create your own points or your own grids. They have a nice little fractal thing that lets you create 2D or 3D fractals, so that you don't even have to worry about going out and finding a file. That Paraview will generate a file for you or a data set for you and let you start manipulating it. So demands of the workflow. What do you, these are things like how big is your data, how many time steps, how complex is your visualization, how many pixels, what high of a resolution do you want to draw? You do it in stereo, you have twice as much. So Paraview, again, is designed to keep things interactive and scalable. So it's going to try to do some smart things. It's going to try to protect you from yourself so that you don't overwhelm your machine and crash it unnecessarily, crash the application. It doesn't crash your computer. The limitations of your computer could be the memory, the CPU, the GPU, which kind of breaks down into polygons and pixels, networking bandwidth, internal bus bandwidth. There's lots of possibilities. So, and there's lots of interesting computer science research projects in sort of analyzing the pipeline and the performance and optimizing things. But to preserve interactivity, Paraview tries to do some things like subsampling the data set. So in some cases, it doesn't try to render all the data. You need to be aware of that so that if you do, for some reason, want to see all the data, to know where to find those various hooks in the program and turn off those flags or say, yes, give it all to me. I'm a big person. I can handle it. If my machine crashes or slows down, I'll be okay. Level of detail, where it tries to, when you're not moving, there's no problem there, so it can render the data at full resolution, but as soon as you start moving, it automatically tries to drop you down to a lower level of resolution. So the goal by default is to keep interactivity high. Might cache time steps, and then there is a feature there where you'll find you have to always remember to go back and push the accept button when you make changes in a parameter. So if you're grabbing a slider and adjusting that value, that could actually be generating dozens or hundreds of events where it might have to re-execute some or all of the pipeline. So instead of doing that every time the computer gets an event, it waits till you get your slider to the right location, hit the accept button, and then update the pipeline once. So this is what some of those things look like. If you had a high resolution data set here, it can actually go to a lower resolution, so you can see it's clustered some vertices together, try to maintain the important features in the data set, but it's not, you are going to lose something. Or it could actually drop down to a lower resolution if you're doing some type of off-screen rendering. So let's look at a couple of examples here. One builds on the case that Justin presented earlier in his talk on the data capacitor, which was the nuclear pasta project. This was a simulation of dense neutron-neutron interaction, such as occurs in the crust of neutron stars and other fantastic places. And it results in what they call pasta-like forms. So basically what you see down at the bottom are 3 different densities of neutrons, and as if they get more dense, they get more complicated structures. I didn't see pasta in this. I saw more like dumplings or bubble gum, but anyway, this was the work of Charles Horowitz and Don Berry here at IU. So what we want to do is take a look. We'll start with some point data, look at a single time step and show you some options there. We'll look at how you can handle multiple time steps. Paraview does some really nice things. As a computer scientist, you tend to write out stuff in very logical ways. The same base file name, 0001. It looks for those patterns within a file system. And if you try to load one, it thinks you want to load all of them, and that's nice. So it can handle temporal data very well. And then we'll show that just starting with the data that you have, part of the trick of being a good visualization expert is to go beyond the data that you're presented and to see if you can derive various additional forms of data that give you more insight into what's going on. So we actually can derive some vector data, derive some volume data as well. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So I'm going to go over, and I already have Paraview running here. And I'm going to go this little shortcut for just file open, and I'll go down to where I've got my VTK files stored locally. Again, the nice thing, we won't actually run a distributed version here, but if I did, what would happen, I'd do one extra step and make a connection to the remote server, and then everything else would look pretty much the same. I would notice some delays as data is transferred, depending on the size of the data. So here's my, let me just grab so there's my data. So now I have one object, a data file, it's a VTK point file, and I can see it hasn't actually read it yet because it's, remember the apply button. So this could be a big data set, might take a long time to read, so you have to tell it, yep, I haven't messed up anything, so you hit apply, and boom, because it's actually point data, it went ahead and did what it thought was intelligent. It it put a point there at each location. So now you can come over here and turn around and manipulate that. You can zoom in and out and so forth. Question?
Quick question. How many points in there?
Good question. How many points in there? Actually, I know, but how would one find out? If you go over to the Information tab, it's going to tell you that it's a polygonal mesh. Now, here's one of the things where you need to learn a little bit about VTK. Even if you only have point data, it goes into a class of files called the polygonal mesh because it thinks ultimately you might try to connect those points together. So you have to read that with a grain of salt, but there's 32,000 points there. Okay. And you know, on this laptop, we can go up to, I'm sorry, I should have actually tested what it is, but it's 3 years old. I'm confident we get up to about 1 million points without too much trouble. You see how much memory it takes. And in fact, you can even bring up one of the views that you can do is do a statistics inspector. And so as you add other things to this pipeline, you can actually see some information about them in a tabular form. So, good question. Okay, you know, and then you can use those because a lot of times you'll think you've done everything right. You'll ask for a representation and nothing comes up. And sometimes you come over to the information, you see there was some type of error, you know, or your sizes weren't right. Other questions? Okay, so well, that's not terribly useful. And one of the problems here is that the data is they're just points, and so I lose a lot of the depth information. So there's any number of things that we'll actually do to try to pull out some more information. But a simple thing I can do is go to the glyph icon here. So I can go up here to, I can do one of two things. I can get so all the things that you can do with a data set are in the filters menu. And it's pretty long there, as they've tried to create some subcategories, things you've recently used, things most people use, and so forth. And the very, very most common things, they've also put little icons out here. So with whatever I want to apply this next operation to, I'm going to link these things together. So in this case, I'm going to select the glyph filter. Okay. And again, remember that in order to actually see anything, I have to hit apply there. And then if you look really carefully, you'll actually see some arrows. So in fact, what I'm going to do is turn off the points. Now I've got an arrow glyph. That's not terribly helpful, but I can go and adjust this. I can make this say a box, and I happen to know from some experimenting with this that I believe the value of 0.2. So now, well, let me make it a little bit bigger. That's the beauty of this, is that because it's interactive, you know, rather than changing your code, it invites experimentation with the various parameters, because as you can see, there's a lot of parameters that you could adjust. And by the way, if you are more programming oriented, there are ways you can actually use Paraview to sort of experiment with different combinations of representations, and then it can give you some hints through a state file and some other things where you could actually go and make your own program if you wanted to. In most cases, you don't. So here's one of those cases where, again, what it's doing to try to keep things interactive is, as you can see on the screen, it's actually changing the representation. And it's also done something here in this glyph mode where it's actually masked out the points. So it only gave me, if I turned on my original points, I would see that it has not shown me all of the 32,000. There's only 5,000 boxes there. So if I really want to tax my graphics system, I can say, don't mask out points, give me all of them. Okay? And then, again, I've got them here. And then I can also go and turn off this, this level of detail stuff if I don't want to see that kind of weird polygonalization. So that's not terribly interesting. So what I'm going to do is hit the little disconnect thing, and that's just kind of a way of starting over very quickly. You can also see that you can bring multiple views up here, and when you bring up additional views, you can make them 3D view, spreadsheet view. They've added a lot of functionality recently for different types of statistical analysis, plots, histograms, and so forth. Okay. But remember, we said it works well for temporal data. So what I'm going to do is just gather all of these time steps. I only got 10 out of the, I think there was something on the order of 2,800 here. And so now I have all the data sets loaded, but it doesn't make sense to put them all in there at once. So what it's done is actually, it will give me an option so I can actually step through this. And if you notice the little time counter up there in the upper right. So the first time it was a little bit slow, but then the next time you can go faster. And so as you delve into the settings, you can actually make this, you can adjust the speed that it plays back and so forth, and use that same thing. So you can animate over time while you might also be moving the camera as well and adjusting some other parameters. So this is what they commonly refer to as just the buzzy dots. You know, this is actually what was going on in the code, but again, it didn't really help give them more insight. They kind of knew that these particles were exerting forces on each other, and that they were, writing out the time steps from between times. So I'm going to disconnect from this and show how we might do that one better. And this, I'm going to actually take advantage of the state files that Paraview has. So a state file just simply, captures what you were doing at that time, so you can restore it at any point in the future. So it remembers what files you read in, what filters you applied to it, how you had your windows set up, how the parameters were adjusted. And so I want to actually interest of time, let me just jump ahead. What I was going to say is, what was more interesting than just looking at the points is really seeing how the points behaved over time. So one of the things that we did was actually just took the difference between two consecutive time steps. So like the 10th point in the first file is the same, represents the same molecule as the 10th point in the second file. So if we use some tricks within Paraview to actually calculate that vector data from 2 points, then we can actually see some more information, which points were moving fast, which ones weren't moving so fast. And so in fact, I think if I bring this up, I can just show you, again, talking about the intuition that you get. And what you'll find, without getting into all the details over here, is there's a lot of movement at the edges, and that is natural because we run into some boundary conditions there. And as we get towards the center of the data set, the movement is actually much smaller. And so proper interpretation, according to the scientists, pay less attention to the stuff on the outside because of that. Let me load up another state file. Another thing that we did is to, rather than treating this as point data, we went through an external process where we took that point data and converted it into a grid of data. In this case, a 128 by 128 by 128 grid, and we took each point, and according to the scientists, that it was not the absolute location of that molecule or that neutron, but it was a statistical representation of its probability being there. So we did a Gaussian splat of that point of each point into this volume. So now we can actually bring to bear some additional representation techniques, because there's only so much you can do with the points. So we've now converted it to a regular grid of densities. So now we can do something such as apply an isosurface. So you can see I read in a raw file here, which is just a stream of bits, a stream of, this is kind of important for you to know. So you have to tell it what type of data, is it big Indian or little Indian, dimensionality, and then the spacing. So then if you just have some simple binary files, this is a nice way to get going. You don't have to write a file converter. And then we're applying what we call the isosurface, or we're setting a contour here for the value of 25. So now, and that's already executed there. And so now I can change the viewpoint there. So what we're seeing is these surfaces represent regions of higher density and lower density. The stuff on the outside is lower density. The stuff inside these isosurfaces or contours is higher density. So that's one way to, okay, so this is better now. So now I'm not just seeing a whole bunch of points. Now I'm starting to see these little nuclear pasta clusters beginning to form. Another possibility is to use what we call volume rendering. So that's not the one I want to turn on. I'm going to turn on that one. And I'll turn off the isosurface. And again, sorry, hopefully IU people, you can follow along on WebEx so you can actually see some of this. Hopefully it comes out better on the other sides. But now we're taking advantage of the volume rendering hardware or the graphics hardware that's available in most common laptops these days. And of course, you can see, but again, we get even a better representation. And we're going straight to the data. We don't have to go through an additional step of extracting out an isosurface. We're going to the original volume data and representing that. So, let me jump back over to the slides for a bit. So again, those are some of the things that we did with nuclear pasta. And again, the lessons to learn here is that the given data, in most cases, should just be the beginning of what you want to do. There's no single right way to visualize most data. There are definitely some wrong ways. You can do some things that introduce visual artifacts or cause the scientists to see something that it really isn't there in the data. So you do need to work wisely to make sure that doesn't happen. And certainly some representations are better for others. But again, this invites that experimentation that I think is really important. And like I said, I think I said this earlier, that lets you test out various parameters, and then you can convert things back to a BTK program or BTK script using Python or one of the many other programming capabilities. So I want to look at just another data set to show you, something that starts off very different. This is actually a seismic tomography from Gary Pavlis. So they're actually using part of the U.S. array. So if you look over there on the left, these are the places where they have all of the seismographs that are sitting out there in the field, and they're actually moving this array. They didn't have enough to cover the whole U.S., so they're doing a third at a time. They're moving them to the Midwest, and then they're moving them to the East Coast. But you see the location of all the seismographs there over the U.S., the western part of the U.S. And then what they're doing is using that to do seismic tomography, and so they're computing through a high-performance computing application what's going on below the Earth's crust. So if you look over there on the right, you can see that curvature. That is the curvature of the Earth there. So given that, we had to work with a curvilinear grid. So now there's no implied coordinates. We have to explicitly say where those coordinates are and what the data values are within there. We'll also see that we do a lot of slicing and clipping, because when we first bring it up, it doesn't look like there's a lot to see. And the interesting stuff, again, is down inside the data set. And so we want to show how we can do a few things there. So how we might convert that data to gather some more insights. Okay, let's clear this off. And so here's the data. You can see a slight curvature there. I can also go under the display option. Remember I said that every filter had some mapping stuff implied in it. So if you go to this middle panel, this panel looks exactly the same, or pretty much the same for every filter that you put up there. The information looks pretty similar too. The properties are going to be the unique things for that particular filter. So while it looks pretty intimidating, keep in mind that display, learn it once, it applies everywhere. Information, the same thing. Should check the information, see what we got. We've got 2,470 cells with 3,000 some odd points. And I can also see the range of the data there and then the dimensionality. What I wanted to show you with the display, that if I scroll down here, right now it's showing outline. I can say, show it to me as points, show it to me as wireframe. That probably gives me the best sense of what's going on, the structure of the grid. Now, it won't show you this stuff inside, but obviously there's stuff going on inside. Now, if I bring up a surface, the thing that's important to note here is that we have now a volume of intensities, and actually so there's a value stored here, and so I can actually adjust the color map. A little bit of scrolling on this. So right now it's actually just showing us a solid color, but if I go over to information panel, I know that this has a field called scalar, which is double, which has something to do with the velocity of the earthquake moving through there. So I want it to actually color by that field. Okay. And I'm going to ask it to show, set the color map so it goes from that minimum value to the maximum value. If I look at it, it still doesn't look like a lot going on. So this is where, again, we have to, before we immediately assume, oh, there must have been something wrong with my data or the program, let's delve inside. So we can bring up a slicer. Again, if I hit apply, and if I look there, if I squint real close, I can start to see, there's some structures there. I can see these waves moving through this form. And in fact, if I take that and again apply that rescale data, now I start to see some stuff. So you have to sometimes dig into your data a little bit to determine what's going on. We could also bring up ISO surfaces for this, and in the interest of time, to leave some opportunities for questions, let me just jump ahead to okay. So now I've actually gone and I had to, you can sort of see this this volume rendering here, which is a little better than the previous one. Actually, I should be changing the background color. That should probably help as well. But there's an option where you can change from that gray to a white. Unfortunately, just thought of that too late. So sorry, folks. Anyhow, and we had to actually do another trick here. Because this was curvilinear, it doesn't by default have the volume mapping option there. It only does that for regular rectilinear grids. So we actually did a test, a step called tetrahedralize, where we, let me show you what that looks like, where it does pretty much what you would have expected. Let me do that as wireframe. So rather than being these rectangular blocks that were kind of curved in one dimension, now it's broken it up into tetrahedron, and so there's a rendering technique that allows us to get a volumetric representation from that. So the lesson here is sometimes you're thinking, oh yeah, I'd like to see this as a volume rendering, and that's not an option, or one of your features that you're going for is not there. Keep in mind that only some options are available for some data types, but there's frequently a way to transform the data from one type to another to let you get to the representation that you want. So actually I wanted to show when you put this all together. I think this is a good one. I hope that comes out for the folks remotely. That gives you an idea of what they were going for. And that's what they use for the presentation mode in their publication. That presentation form of visualization. So I wisely figured that everything would take longer than it did. So I just have a few quick slides on advanced features. The client server setup, if you actually want to do that, look at PV server. There's a way you can give a flag for MPI run that lets it run across multiple processes on your back end. Off-screen renderer is an option that allows it to actually transfer image data instead of geometric data. And just some note for some IU folks, I was not successful in getting to run from the server forward to the client, or excuse me, from the client back to the server. But they do have an option if you've got firewalls and such, where that could cause a problem where the reverse connection did work. Take that with a grain of salt, because that could just be part of my technology ignorance. But that definitely does work, where the server calls up the client and your client accepts that incoming connection, and you're off to the races. Other than that, it's not very exciting to show that here, because it looks just like you're using it locally. When you get really big data, things will start to slow down. And keep in mind, a lot of the stuff that you see about running Paraview in parallel, we'll actually talk about data decomposition methods. One of the choices that you have to make is what makes the most sense for your data and what you're trying to do. Do you take your data, in this case over there on the left, some type of CFD computation over the space shuttle, and do you divide up the various parts of the grid, the geometry, and send those to different processors? Or do you divide things up in image space, as we're showing over there on the right, so everybody's got a copy of the same data, but they're only rendering various parts of the screen for that particular time step. And so you'll either see these you'll see these multicolored images, and they're trying to show you how that's distributed over the various nodes on the back end, or they'll do the same thing for the screen tiles as well. There's ways you can do batch animation. So if you've got a really big data set, an option is to decimate it, bring it down, kind of work through your visualization parameters, and then set up a batch file where you can actually start it up and you can disconnect it, and it will continue to run and drop out frames, or dump out frames through the file system, and then you can turn those into a movie. There's all kinds of options for scripting. You can bring up a shell. If you like Python, you can do a shell. You can do a programmable filter. One of the examples, I know I was going by fast, but it was using the programmable Python filter. You can extend it by writing macros, plugins, custom filters. So the sky's the limit, but I think the real key there is that with some effort, you'll be able to scale it up so that you won't always be running into a problem of, wow, my data's too big, my computer's not fast enough, because no matter what computer you get, desktop computer or cave or tiled wall, you can always imagine a data set that's going to outstrip it. So having an intelligent visualization package is a good thing, and there are others, Visit being one of them. So time for just a few questions.
Questions, anybody? So I have a question. So TerraGrid is just about to invest, or is investing in several new visualization facilities. And I was told by some distinguished leader in TerraGrid that the key idea that was new is that you can now do remote visualization. That it is realistic to sit in your home institution and view visualizations made on TerraGrid. How does that which in the past probably the network connection was not fast enough, or maybe something was not right. How does that fit in with your discussion?
You're probably referencing the Envision portal that TAC is running.
Yeah, well, they had one of the early ones. Remember, there were several awards. I think there's also one. I think there are about 3 awards in that area. I'm not quite certain.
Right. I think there's 2. One is at TAC and one is at Oak Ridge or at NICS. Yes. And I think TAC is the group that's pushing the remote visualization. They have a portal, again, built with VTK. They call it Envision, Envision. Yes, they're actually doing all of the pipeline, all that visualization pipeline on their big visualization systems, Longhorn, and I forget the name of the other. And then they're just actually scraping the pixels because they have some graphics hardware there. They're bringing the pixels to your web browser. So, and then every time you say you want to interact with the parameter, you're sending a command back to their system. It's rendering a new frame and bringing it back. So I have not tried it yet. I think it's looking much more promising. And I think the only potential downside is that it would require someone to learn yet another interface. But again, it's built on VTK, so it's following those same sorts of, it does things that you would expect if you've used Paraview, if you've used Visit or MyAvi. It's also possible to do those things with Paraview but it puts more of a burden on the user to set up the proper batch files and to script things, wait for their nodes to become available, and then to make the connections. So,
if you believe what Alex Saleh said, such a model of remote visualization is sort of the only practical way you're going to start visualizing these very large data sets that are.
I believe that would, yeah, for the very largest ones. But I think depending on the particular visualization needs, if you have walls, tile displays, or stereo displays, and immersive types of displays, if those are better suited for the task at hand, you might still need to cut that pipeline at a different location. But yeah, I'm excited.
At Penn State.
I'm sorry?
I have a question at Penn State. I'm sorry if I interrupted.
Oh,
Yeah,
no
please,
problem.
please ask your question.
Hi, could you just quickly summarize why Paraview might be a better tool to use with large sets of data as opposed to other visualization tools?
Mainly because it has that scalability. It is widely supported on the TerraGrid and some other cyber infrastructures. Is there a particular tool that you were maybe thinking about using instead?
No, nothing in particular.
Yeah, and it's sort of, there are other tools that do scale. I want to be very clear about that. But in an area where people are come to us for recommendations, this is the one that we found is the easiest for people to learn, and it does have that scalability. And so, yeah, but there are others that would work. But if you don't have a preference, then pick this one because we can support you better. We can support a larger community. That's part of our thinking. Suresh.
How much Paraview and geospatial awareness rationalized like for use with astronomical data compared to like lots of like calibration images, like take a telescopic image, walk through it and so forth. Like will it have lots of geospatial awareness built in?
How much geospatial awareness is there in Paraview? Good question. I don't know for sure. I mean, they're clearly, we've done that with Gary Pavlis's data set. We brought in some topo overlays or some state boundaries so we could have some reference marks and brought them in. But it's probably not the best if you're if you're doing a lot of things that would be the domain of traditional GIS packages. It could be that one of those would be better. So I know that the Titan toolkit has features for geolocating data, showing say geographical networks and so forth. And I think those two, if they're not merged now, they will be. Those features will sort of be merged in. So I think as it grows and that becomes more important, you'll probably see more of those features in there.
Minnesota has a question.
Yeah, we have a question. Are you the question?
Okay.
I want to, what is the state of the art between Paraview and the current GPU computing platforms and hardware?
Good question. There are some advanced features of Paraview and Visit and VTK that can actually take advantage of some of those GPU based rendering sorts of things. So I know there's, for example, there's a real-time raycasting thing called Manta Ray that has come out of the University of Utah, and it's possible to replace your OpenGL renderer with a pseudo real-time ray tracer based on Manta Ray. So the architectures are there where you can replace those rendering windows with some other things, and the hope is that if you're just writing raw GPU code or CUDA code, you might always be able to come up with a cooler or a faster algorithm. But if you do it within that Paraview architecture or the Visit architecture or one of those other packages that are scalable, then you don't have to, it's not a choice of one or the other. So, but I am not familiar with the specific things they have in there. I know, George, do you happen to know if they've got features in there? George Otto?
Thank you. I wasn't sure that was me, George, but.
Oh.
Actually, no, I can't talk to specific implementations. We haven't done that here, but I was just looking online, and there is some new GPU support in BTK, and some presentations out there about setting up Paraview with GPU Viz clusters. So a little Googling, you might find some useful things out there. It's not much help, but that's all I know.
Oh, thank you. It's George Otto, another Viz expert. I'm sorry, other questions?
I have a quick question from the University of Minnesota.
Okay.
So amongst the processing stages, which is the most computing intensive stage? Is that filtering, rendering, displaying, and so on?
It depends. If you have, let's say, depending on your file format, let's say you have everything stored in very large files, and you say you're only interested, say you have several dozen fields in there, and you're only interested in one, it could be that the reading part takes a lot of time, just to read that data in, to pull out the few chunks that you need. And so in that case, the reading part would be the most computationally intensive. Some of the more advanced rendering techniques can involve more time, especially if you go for more correctness, if you have, say, surfaces combined with volumes in it, and if you want it to do it correctly, it actually needs to sort all the information from back to front when things are transparent. So if you start mixing visual styles, that can actually really crank up the load on the graphics part of the pipeline. So, I hate to dodge it there, but it really depends on the nature of what you're trying to do. And that's what makes it kind of a fun computer science project, because you can use your kind of analysis of algorithms, and you can look at your various performance metrics, and you can look at the pipeline, and you can try to optimize it. But a really good question. Sorry, I can't be more specific.
I have a question I need to ask you.
Yes,
I would like to see if there are any performance tuning tools that you can use with Paraview to, I guess, address the different stages to see, whether you're doing a good job or not at each of the stages.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that one more time? I only got parts of it.
Yeah, I'm sorry. The question is about tools to do performance tuning on Paraview on each of the stages, if possible, just to make sure that you're doing the right, right kind of, I guess, composition, and that your rendering algorithms are, being, I guess, distributed as much as possible, and so on and so forth.
Okay.
What kind of tool would you recommend for that?
One of the things, if you go into Paraview, so I think there was two parts, kind of correctness and then performance. One of the things that Paraview tries to do is it only lets you, if you select a certain data type or one of the filters in the pipeline, it will only allow you to connect to it those filters that make sense. Okay, that's still more than so it's doing some preventive correctness for you there, if I can invent a term on the fly. So it's keeping you from doing something that doesn't make sense. You could still do some not so intelligent things in terms of a visualization sense, but that's a little bit of a tool. In terms of performance, really looking, I guess, at the, you can, I briefly showed that statistical view, so you can see how you're doing in terms of data sizes, how much memory it takes. So one of the things that you often don't think about is, wow, if I bring this data in and, I want to put let's say that point data, and we put a sphere at it. If you put a sphere with too many polygons there, you can quickly go from something that's a couple megabytes to a couple hundred megabytes in order to store all of the polygons to represent those spheres. So looking at some of those information views and those spreadsheets there can help. And then, of course, just one of the simplest things is just the frame rate. I mean, if you're getting if you're purposefully using the various levels of detail and tips to keep things interactive, and you're still not getting a good frame rate, then that's part of the key. And of course, are the scientists getting information that is useful, and that's the purpose of the whole thing. So there may be other things. Certainly, in theory, I guess it's possible to do various types of performance tools that one would use for MPI sorts of codes in conjunction. You might require some compiling in with the Paraview backend components, but would actually have to defer to one of our HPC experts to verify if that's possible.
So I think we've reached the end of this first day, so I'd like to thank Eric for a wonderful authoritative talk.